All right. This is it. The final session on the final day of the conference. And I'm very happy to see that you decided to join a hardcore deep dive session on WinPE version 4 as your grand finale. My name is Johan, and I will be taking care of you for the next hour. I love questions, and I was a bit surprised, but Ringnes will be the prize for the best question today, I think. They gave it to me at least, so I figured I can give it away. They can sue me later. So I love questions, good questions. I also love good questions after the seminar, but I won't reward you with beer though. Feel free to contact me on Twitter, find me on Facebook, my blog, search for my name, my last name, and you'll find me. As I've said multiple times this conference, it's 8 people in the world with that last name. I'm the only one doing deployment so far. I hope the other ones are sane enough to stay away from it. So you will find me. Internet search. All right. This session is about building custom boot images. So the first question I think that is relevant to try to answer, why? Why would we try to do that? Well, 2 reasons. The first one is, when we have deployment solutions, we often want to tailor-made them to fit our organization the way we would like to deploy machines. And part of that is customizing and adding components, scripts, front ends, and stuff like that into the boot image. So that's the first one. The second one is learning. Because what we will learn today is not only how we can customize and work with it, we will also learn how to troubleshoot and how WinPE is integrating with the normal deployment solutions that you use. And by learning how to customize the boot image, you will know what to do when a normal deployment breaks and you have to hit F8, get into the command prompt, and do some real troubleshooting. Then it's really useful to know what components WinPE is built up for. So that we will do. 2 parts mainly. Custom images, and then trying to figure out how they fit into the environments that we normally use, and then some time on troubleshooting. I'll be using this demo environment, being used it quite a lot these 2 days, but this is my laptop, a lot of disk, a lot of RAM, allow me to do many virtual machines at the same time, which is good. Now, Windows PE is not available to everybody yet. It's currently available for those of you who have an MSDN subscription on Microsoft. Or if you are a partner with Microsoft, you have an MSDN subscription automatically, and then you also have access to these tools. These will be available in the beta 2 timeframe when Windows 8 comes along. But to create a brand new Windows PE 4 image, we need that ADK kit, assessment and deployment kit. And we simply need to get the folder from that kit, we need to get the WinPE WIM file from that kit, and then we need a few more files to be able to create and manage that WIM file and to create, for example, bootable ISO files. So this is what we need, and this is how we do it. So I will connect myself to a file server where I have ADK installed. And if you attended my session on, well, yesterday, you'll learn how to install the ADK. I will not cover that again. It's just a normal setup. But what I would like to highlight to you is the setup name for it. After downloading the ADK, it's actually the ADK setup exe you have to find. This one is the launcher. Do not try to launch the MSI files. This is the file to use. All right, so I run through that setup, so it's done. So now I will simply connect to it remotely. It's on the C drive by default. It's in the 32-bit folder by default for some reason. But here it is. So we have Windows Kits, version 8, of course. And then you can see we have the assessment and deployment kit here, and this is where Windows PE is. So Windows PE is Windows pre-installation environment. So I will dive into that folder. I will go into each architecture. I will go to build a 32-bit one for now. So this is my media folder. This is the structure to create a bootable ISO. So I will copy that to my host. I will just create a temp folder. I will call it WinPE. And I will paste that folder in there. Then I will also need the WIM file. So I will go back to my server and I will get the WIM file. This is the boot image. This is the default WinPE image. Nothing added to it, just the default. So I will copy that one too, and I will paste it into the media folder, and I will create a subfolder called sources. And I will paste it in. And I will rename it to boot.wim, because that's the name it needs to have for the default BCD record to find it. Right. So I copied the folder, I added a file. Now I need to add a few more files to make it bootable. So I need a L3 to file system boot, and that's available here. 32, OSGAIM. This is the actual boot record that will make it bootable. This is the application that will make it bootable when I run it. So I will copy those files as well. I will paste it in. So now I have my folder here. Now I'm ready to create an ISO. So I will go to Deployment Tools command prompt. I will navigate to that folder. I will run the OSD command with the -B switch for boot sector. Looks good. I was just checking. Specify the name. Specify long file name support. This utility can be used to create ISOs of everything. I normally use it to create ISO files that I use in my virtual machines. I don't make them bootable all the time. Sometimes I just need containers for installation files to be able to quickly map them into a Hyper-V or VMware and then use it. But long file name support and the media folder and the obviously Oslo 1.iso file name. So now it's created almost 200 meg ISO file. I can take that, I can go to an empty client, here we go. Difficult to mount an ISO on a Saturday afternoon. So I select the ISO and I will boot from it. So you should soon see the developer preview thing here. And that sort of a new timeout or timer dialog. It will start the networking. That's WP init, starting the networking in WinPE. And this is my boot image. So if I look and do an IP config, I should have a network address at least. So this is just the base, the core image. Do we want to boot that as an ISO all the time? No. We want to pixie boot it. So, in Windows 8, there is a new version of Windows Deployment Services. It's not changed that much, but they did add a few nice features to it. For example, as you probably know, in 2008 R2, you do not need Active Directory for Windows Deployment Services. You can have a standalone Pixie server in a workgroup serving boot images for your deployments. Could be useful if you have a DMZ or a secure environment where you simply want to have Pixie, but you don't have the domain or access to the domain. That was a 4-page white paper before, where 2 of those pages involved what registry keys you should add. Because in 2008 R2, the admin UI for Windows Deployment Services in standalone mode is regedit. Now in now in Windows 8, it's slightly easier. Because when you start a setup, this is what you see. Click or click. Done. I would argue this is easier. All right. We can, in the WS console, see all and manage all pre-staged devices that we have in Active Directory. In 2008 R2, we do that through WDS util. Now we have a UI for it. Microsoft, I don't understand why, but they did add model support in their drivers, because you can technically deploy an OS through Windows Deployment Services. You're not supposed to, but you could, and you can. And you can also inject drivers based on plug-and-play ID, and you can filter now by model. Don't do this. Windows Deployment Services is not the solution. We use it for Pixie and multicast and the other goodies. Windows Deployment Services is only good if you need to apply a static image. Then you can use Windows Deployment Services. The setup and deployment MVPs, we are about 20 in the world now. We have been on our very knees in Redmond asking them to, can you please remove the OS deployment capability out of Windows Deployment Services, because customers get confused. They think that's the solution. And then they start complaining, well, it's not dynamic enough. No, it's not, because that's not the solution. The solution is Config Manager, MDT, or third party. Windows Deployment Services is not. But the problem they have, in order to exist at Microsoft as a product group, the thing they develop need to actually do something. So that's why they have to have it in, even though we never use them. Properties that you previously only find in the registry is now being added in the UI, and I will show you that in a minute. Microsoft is also adding in support for all the new platforms being available for Windows 8. The new UEFI support and the new ARM platforms. And you will also see a bunch of new command line switches for WDS util if you still want to use that utility. So let me jump to a server where I have Windows Deployment Services added. You can recognize it, but this is where, I don't have any right now, but this is where all your pre-staged devices will appear if you have any in Active Directory. And you can modify them directly from here. Also, if you have a device in here, you can also simulate the deployment with it. You can right-click and you can say simulate deployment, and it will try to figure out, if I deploy that machine, what type of drivers would I need? But I don't do that from here. I do not work with deployments from here. I use Windows Deployment Services for this. I use it to pixie boot my boot images that I create, or my solutions create. But if I go to properties on my Pixie server, this one is the same. This still doesn't work very well, because that's depending on the Pixie ROM reading this, and most don't. This is the same. Specify the name. I don't use this. This is new, or somewhat new. This is where we will see all the new architectures being available. If you do that in 2008 R2, you will see 3. Now you have double that. And of course, we can have a default image for each and every architecture. I don't understand why they still fight to have Itanium in there, but all right. When was the last time you deployed an Itanium server? A few weeks ago. I'm impressed. For me, it was back in 2005, when they were new and hip. All right. Client, the same thing. Also support for the new architectures for unattended deployments. DHCP is exactly the same. Multicast is the same. Multiple thresholds and such. Multiple streams. This one is the same. This one is not the same. What's the difference compared with 2008? 2008 by default has not UDP policy enabled or configured, meaning Windows Deployment Services will claim ports. If a customer for some reason decided to also deploy DNS on the same box as Windows Deployment Services, they will claim the same ports. You're not supposed to have DNS on your deployment server, but sometimes customers do because they have it in the lab and they have everything on the same machine. The workaround in 2008 R2 was to go into the registry and flip a switch, UDP port policy. Now, this one is actually enabled by default. Here. This configuration means Windows Deployment Services, rather than claim ports, will ask for ports. So that's a good thing. And finally, it's been a long wait, but it's finally here. A UI for specifying the block size for the TFTP blocks, and even better, this one. Windows Deployment Services, when you pixie boot, when you start to download that boot image, will try to learn your network and try to adjust the window size accordingly to get you the most, or get the boot image downloaded most quickly. My record time with some version of this is about 15 seconds to download a boot image over a network. That's pretty good. Normally it's about 45. But truth to be told, I also had to configure this one. I was lucky to have a client that supported 16K blocks. Not all clients will do that, but most will do at least 4 or even 8. And that makes it quicker. 8K, that is, not megs. So that's it. That's the Windows Deployment Services. Now, what if we want to add more things than default to our boot images? Well, we need to crank open it and start injecting components. So let's start with the optional components. In the media folder, or on the Wike installation folder, I go back to Windows PE, back to 32-bit, this folder, WinPE optional components. This is where all the components are. So for example, if I want to add support for HTA, this is the cab file. If I want to add support for .NET Framework, which is new, this is this cab file. If I want to add support for PowerShell as well, which requires .NET Framework, I can do that too. I can add support for scripting. I can add support for WMI, or even WinRE, or the configuration of it. So this is just a repository of components. So I will simply copy this folder over to my environment again. Temp, WinPE. So now I can take a command prompt. And currently I have an empty folder called mount. So I will use image X, and I will mount, read write, my ISO, or my image. So in media folder, sources, boot.vim, index 1, and the mount folder. This is like you do today. So I'm opening the Vim file, and as soon as it's opened, I can start to do things with it. So for example, I can start use DISM to add packages to it, to add optional components to it. So I will use DISM, I will use add package, and I have to specify a package path. And no, DISM does not have auto-completion, so you need to type them correctly. But at least I can use auto-completion here by adding a quote after the colon, because then I can simply tab to the correct folder though, to make sure I don't do any stupid typos. It's not doing that well for me. Didn't I put it in that folder? Yes, I did. WinPE. Here we go. And I will specify the WinPE. And for example, I say I want to add scripting support. Sorry? That's the old folder. It looks like I've done this demo before. And by the looks of it, this morning, running through all the steps. But you're right. It will work the same though. It's the same component. But I will select the right folder for recording purposes. Here we go. Right should be right. Thank you. That's the beer, by the way. Who said that? Who pointed it out? It's waiting for you down here, sir. I will not come up there. It's too high. So I will add a scripting cab, and I will hit enter. And I need to specify the path. Sorry. /image colon. The beer broke my pattern here. It's not good. This is not my day. Oh, it's a long day. What could possibly go wrong in a live demo? So now I'm adding the scripting package. And the thing about packages, they always comes in pairs. So I need a package and I need the language part of that package. So that's the core pack. And then I need the language part, which is in the language folder. And then it's named similar. Not the same, but similar. So now I'm adding the language part to it. So that was the scripting package. Let's go ahead and add WMI support. So I'm adding WMI. And I'm adding the language part of WMI. I will add in .NET Framework. Here we go. The thing named .NET, it's not .NET. That's support for 1021X in WinPE. Don't do that. Ever. I have about a customer every third month asking me, can you please help us configure the boot images for 8021X? And my answer is no. I don't do that anymore. It's too troublesome. Configure your switches for temporary access in your deployment network. Don't fiddle with 1021X. Just a personal opinion here. And I will add the .NET Framework component here as well, the language part. And then we only have one more to add, and that's PowerShell support. So I will find the PowerShell library or package. PowerShell version 3, by the way. And the language part. So that was adding a few components. I can, of course, simply go to a folder that I have with some tools like ImageX or ZoomIt, and I can just copy and paste that into my mounted directory. And now I've added some tools to my boot image. I can add drivers using DISM. So I can say add driver, specify driver, colon, and I can specify the path to where I have a driver. This is the adapter controller and the driver for the adapter controller. So now I'm adding a driver to my boot image that I need. I can even do things in the Windows PE registry. I can use regload to load the offline registry into the current registry, and then I can use that to inject stuff to it. I can also do that from the normal regedit command, but it's more fun to do it from the command line. So I will specify a temp folder or a temp hive, and then I will find the default registry in my mount folder, system32 config default. Now that's opened. So if I go to regedit and look in AK local machine here, I have temp, and inside temp, this is my WinPE registry, but it's just loaded up here right now. So if I want to, I have a stuff registry file. And the stuff in this file is simply setting the command prompt to be green in WinPE. And it's also adding some ZoomIt settings in WinPE, and also settings for a component I will add soon, background info in WinPE. So I can just double click this one, say yes, they will be added. And then I can, of course, simply unload the hive again. And the changes will be committed. Do not forget to do unload. It will stay loaded forever. I've tried. So that was adding registry. I can also add in custom plugins. You can create your own plugins for WinPE version 4 and 3 and 2 and previous. So I have authored 2 plugins for WinPE version 4 that I have here. It's a little bit undocumented, and it's certainly not supported. But this is, for example, a plugin that will add ADSI to WinPE, allowing you to do Active Directory calls directly from the boot image. I normally use a web service for this, but if you want, you can do this. And the way we can author plugins is we treat it as a driver. So I create INF files. I create drivers that is not really drivers. It's adding other stuff. I also had a plugin for BG Info, a driver that will install BG Info on the component. So you can create plugins of everything. It's just learn the syntax. And this you can download from my blog if you want to, if you would like to get a sample where to start. So since it's a driver per se, I will inject them as a driver. This is how I added a driver. ADSI, whoops, 32, plugin, boom. It added ADSI. Let's go ahead and add BG Info. BG Info is added. So now I have added components, I've added drivers, I've added files and folders, I've added settings to my registry, and I've imported additional components to it. I would say I have done quite some changes to my boot image. So it's now time to do an image X and do an unmount and do a commit. Because if you don't do a commit, whatever change you did will be discarded, and ImageX, unlike this, will not prompt you and warn you that you have unsaved changes. This by default will break though. Why? Because ImageX, because this, and because of the filter driver in Windows, it's very sensible for open file handles. It breaks unless you make very sure to close all Explorer windows before committing the changes. You learn this after about 10 times. But remember to close Explorer windows before committing changes and you will be good. It will save you some troubles. Alright, I have a new image. I will hit F5 to bring the command prompt history. And I will redo my ISO process again. Of course, after I have powered down this one, which is currently locking the ISO file. And you didn't warn me. Here we go. New ISO on its way. Done. You can see it's slightly larger now, since I've added a few components to it. It's almost 300 megs in size. But now I can start again. And this time it should look a little bit different than last time. soon. You can see the green background, wasn't there before. If I go into the tools folder, you can see my tools. I can then run ImageX. I can go into 32-bit folder. I can run zoom it from within WinPE so that I can zoom in WinPE if needed. Not very useful, I think, but you could. If I go into the System32 folder, where I added BG info, I can run that. And this is a weird quirk in the preview version of WinPE. You have to run it twice. The first one will just make the background black. The second one will actually add the info to the background. I expect that to be fixed, but that's just how it is right now. So just add a pause in between, or if you wait a few seconds and run it again, and you're fine. And I also do not know how to get rid of that one in the middle. It's just there. It doesn't do that in WinPE version 3 though. So I added scripting support, and I added ADSI support, right? So I should be able to launch a VB script that will connect me with Active Directory to, for example, list all the users in the user's container for me. So I will net use to server share, where I happen to have that script. This is just a VB script. The thing that you need to do in WinPE is that you need to bind to a specific domain controller, and you need to specify a user that has access to that for that binding and to do that reading. And then this is just a VB script proving ADSI is available. So I can run wscript, I can select that script, it will contact Active Directory, my domain controller, and hopefully pop up and give me a list of users back eventually. Soon. Here we go. It's responding back from all the users in the user's container. So you can clearly see it has access to Active Directory. I also added in PowerShell. So I can actually start PowerShell in WinPE. And I can do some fancy PowerShell command, get WMI object, and here auto-completion actually works. So for example, I can get the computer system information. This is the info about this machine. Domain, manufacturer, model, things like that, physical memory. Proving that WMI and PowerShell actually works inside the boot image. All right. So, how do this tie into the normal deployment solutions that we use? Well, they all do what I did in the command prompt. But they do that either as part of creating the image or actually during deployment. For example, how many of you are using Config Manager? A good few of you. When you do a Windows 7 deployment with Config Manager, for example, when does Config Manager install drivers into the operating system you are deploying? Any ideas? It's calling dism. It's doing exactly what I did for my boot image. It will do for the the current operating system that you are deploying. And sometimes when you have an issue, you see the task sequence is failing, you can step out, F8, get the command prompt, launch the same command manually, and see if something pops up to you. Give you something back that you did not see in the log file. Very useful. Same thing with light touch deployments. I guess some of you are doing that as well. It also creates boot images. So let me start with light touch. I would argue that it's a bit easier to add components into WinPE in light touch, because packages, what are packages? Do we need packages for WinPE version 4? You will eventually. Do you need it for WinPE version 3? Yes or no? It's a leading question. The answer is yes, you need it. For example, some hardware today and since the past 2 years are shipping with 4K drives. 4K drives is also named advanced format hard drives, meaning they do not have a 512 byte sector, they have a 4K byte sector. And Windows PE doesn't get that. The Service Pack 1 or the Update 1 version is supposed to have that, but there is a fix after that. So that's a package that you download from Microsoft, then you can use either DISM to inject into the boot image to add support for 4K drives to make sure they align the partition correctly when you deploy something to them. If not, that 4K drive will go into an emulator mode, emulating 512, and you will have about 30% slower machine, just because you did not add that patch to the boot image. And in Light Touch, you just right-click, you say import packages, and you add the package in here, and when you update the boot image, it will add the package to it. You don't have to use DISM. If you need to add drivers, you add them into drivers. If you want to get a little bit luxury, you create folders in here. So you will create a WinPE 32-bit folder where you will put drivers for WinPE, or in this case packages for WinPE. And you will do the same thing for drivers, because we might have packages or drivers for OSs, but I want to target only WinPE. So I create folders and I create profiles. Profiles is a filter, a WinPE filter. I will select the two folders, targeting only WinPE, and on my deployment share, on the properties, on the 32-bit one, I will configure it to only get packages and drivers from this one. I'm limiting the packages and drivers that goes into the boot image. And now it's deciding to take a break. Can't take a break yet because we have 14 minutes left to go, or 16. But it did. I will pretty sure if I click, it will go blank. Yep, it did. But I know the trick. I did that trick yesterday. Windows Task Manager. Here we go. It's actually quite nice in Windows 8. This one is apparently not responding. Here we go. I think it died. Open it again. Because what I was about to show you was another setting. In WinPE, in Features, I would say it's a little bit easier to add components compared with doing it command line style. But be assured, this workbench will do exactly that in the background when you hit update on the deployment share. And if that process fails, you will get a strange error message that will give you nothing on how to solve the problem. Then it's good to know how to do it manually, because then you can do it manually and you can see what error you get. Also, in Light Touch, there is a somewhat unknown feature. In the samples folder, there is a script being called every single time you update the deployment share. In that script, you have the option of hooking in other stuff that you want to do to the WIM file as well. Meaning the stuff that I did in the command line, I can add as a VB script or call a batch file something, so that that operation is being carried out every single time I update my deployment share. It's quite good. All right, what about Config Manager? Same thing. This is a Config Manager 12 environment. It also has boot images. This is actually the boot images I created in my previous session. So I have 2 boot images here. They are packages, meaning they are available on the file system. Here. But in Config Manager, every boot image is 2 boot images. Which one to modify if you need to do a change? The small one. The small one by name and by size, because that's the template. Every time you update the distribution point, the top one is created, and if you added stuff to the top one, guess what? After the update, it's no longer there. So the small one by name and by size. There is a similar wizard to create it. Create boot image. You specify a source. Test. A name, test. You can select architecture and scratch base. And you can select components. Config Manager currently does not support WinPE version 4. It's only version 3, so we'll only see components related to version 3. All right, so I will cancel this one out. What if you want to have other stuff, scripts, files into the boot image? Well, new in Config Manager 12 is that you can specify a path to include files, and that's a UNC path. So every time you update the boot image, the stuff that you have in that folder will be added to the boot image. But what if we want to have more control, or can't we do something else? How do you solve this in Config Manager 07? 07 doesn't have this folder in that way. Well, it turns out that even in Config Manager 012, if you go into the file system, I can actually use Explorer, it's easier, where you have installed Config Manager, go to the bin folder, 64-bit, let me see, OSD in, here we go. This is the OSD injection XML file. This file, if I open up that in Explorer or Internet Explorer, it's just a list of all files and folders that are being added to the boot image every single time you do an update of it. How difficult do you think it is to add a few lines with files of your own, with folders of your own? Not very difficult at all, but it's unsupported. And be very sure this file will be overwritten when there is an update. So keep a copy of it if you do changes to it. But this is quite useful as well. Then, if I go back here, there are still things that could go wrong even when starting WinPE. When we work with the solutions, when we have the deployments going, we will use each solution's troubleshooting engine to monitor that and to troubleshoot that. And most times that means log into the log files, check into the log files one way or another. But WinPE actually has a few one of its own. So if I go back to my client here, if I go to my X drive, system32, for example, it's not uncommon that you do an IP config and you get nothing. It's blank. It means there was no NIC driver available. Okay, I get that, but how do I troubleshoot it? Well, in here, there is a WP-init log file that will tell you exactly how much time it spent on networking, what driver it tried to install, and for what device it tried to install that driver. And that can often give you a clue on what driver to get and try again. So what do you do if you have a machine that doesn't give you an IP address? Well, what you simply could do is go to another machine that you have connection on, download a few network drivers on it, put it on a USB stick, put that USB stick into your machine, and then you can use driver load one by one, start WP-init, and see which one that actually works. And once you figured out which one that works, yeah, that's the one we will add into the workbench if we're doing light touch, or into the drivers repository if we're doing config manager. Because even in config manager, we can add drivers directly to the boot images. There is also another file in the in folder. It's called setup.api.dev.log file. This holds more detailed information about all devices that have been available or installed on this machine since boot. And sometimes that can also give you a clue why it didn't load a specific driver. So, yep. With that, I would like to highlight a few resources available. That's my blog and a few other. Deployment Bunny is a fun one. It's a co-author for a few of the books we have written. He still threats me by appearing on stage in a bunny suit. I hope he never will do that for me, because I will not be able to sleep ever again. But I hope you guys had a great conference. I sure did, and I would like to thank you for taking your time joining me here at the final session. I'm very happy about that, so thank you guys. Oh, and don't forget to push those cards in the fishbowl thing.